I received a really good question over the weekend outlining, one portion of the assignment that was left a little bit open ended. One of the things that Ron, who proposed the Freedom Park idea, mentioned is that he wanted to have a brick pathway leading through the park to guide you kind of to each of the statues that are going to be proposed. And I had a student inquire, okay, I'd like to incorporate this pathway so that it can be viewed in relation to my design, but I don't really, how should I do this? It's kind of, not totally sure how to tackle it. There are a couple different ways that you could go about um, incorporating that pathway. So I'm going to hop over to Chrome and I've just Googled in brick path. And there are tons of examples. There's curved paths, there's straight paths, there's paths that wind around hills. Different colors, some of them are sort of put together like a mosaic, others have a special pattern to them. I don't even know that Ron has a really, thought out part to this yet. I think it's just an idea at the moment. But if you were wanting to incorporate this in some way into your design, there are a couple different ways that you could go about it. Maybe one of the simpler or more straightforward ways would be to just copy a photograph of a brick path like this one, make a selection around it, create a mask, and put it or place it wherever you'd like it to be, and then touch up the edits. But there are a couple, different problems that can arise based on that. One of the issues that can arise is that you want to take into consideration that as the path goes further away from you, it's going to appear smaller than it does closer. So you want to make sure that you can incorporate the idea of perspective, that things are going to recede the further away from you that they get. And that's not just the width of the pathway, but also the sizes of the bricks get smaller. And when you get way up here, you can barely even tell that there are bricks there any longer, and it's not just a paved street like this one over here. So there are some things that you would want to pay attention to if that was going to be a direction that you'd want to take. But there are some workarounds that you could use to help sort of convey the idea that I think that you're looking for. So within Photoshop, I'm going to bring in a photograph of the park, and we'll say another option is there are sidewalks. You could always overlay a brick pattern onto the sidewalks present. But I'll pick this picture, place it into my document the way that I've asked everybody to, and I'll rotate. Ooh, let's rotate the whole thing. There we are. And I'm gonna grab my move tool and just shift it, figure out where the best is gonna be. All right, so there's already a pathway over here. So let's pretend I'd like to kind of have my path curve up this way and then lead over to this over here. All right, so one way that I might start it is I might start by either making a selection, which, can have its own problems, but just because I know I get the precision that I'm looking for, I'm going to grab my pen tool and just for fun, for right now, I'm going to pick just a colored fill. Nothing crazy, just something to put so I can visualize, where my placement's going to be. So I'll start by making the base of my path. And we'll say I want it to sort of curve this way. And I'll assume it's going to be narrower over there. I'll fix the wacky curve in a moment. And I want it to get thicker as it comes over. And I've connected this. So it's a very simple curve. I think it's got 4 points total. I'll correct. Oops. I'll correct the anchor point that's not doing what I want it to do. And then fix this one. So we'll say I want my path to sort of curve similar to what's going on here, basically. You know, nothing too fancy, but just enough to get the idea that it isn't just a straight line, okay? And in this instance, and I'll hide this, I kind of used some of the marks that the lawnmower had made over the grass, just to sort of give me an idea of what's the surface of the grass doing. All right, so we'll say that's my placeholder for right now. One way that you could go about doing this is you could find a seamless brick texture. So seamless brick pattern, texture, either way. I'll go to my images. Oh, here we go, texture. And as usual, I'll make sure I have the biggest possible end product. And I'll pick a brick that I think would look good. So I like this one. It's not quite as weathered looking. And if you recall, Ron had said that it would, you know, be one of those situations where someone could purchase a brick and have someone's name chiseled into it as like a memorialized element of this park. So I'll click View Image, save it as, and save it to my desktop. Okay. So if I wanted to take this brick pattern and turn it into a pattern that I can fill this path with, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I don't just mean mask it in, but I mean physically turn it into a pattern that you can use over and over that becomes a part of Photoshop. One thing that the fill has that you can do, in addition to color, is you can fill it with gradient, but also a pattern. Now, by default, Photoshop doesn't have the most exciting pattern options available. Like some of them look like stone. This one's got sort of a tie-dye thing going on. But I can bring in my own patterns to reference. In fact, Photoshop has more than what's visible here. If I click on the little gear and go to Preset Manager, and it's set to patterns, I can actually pick different types of textures. So let's see what's under erodible textures. Some of these are like paper textures. I might maybe, let's see, nature I think is plants. I'll go to rock patterns. So I've got different types of stone. So I'm gonna click done. There we go. It takes a minute to update, so sometimes changing. So I've got different types of stone patterns. So like this one looks like a rock sort of surface. Now it's a little small as it is. So if I wanted to see bigger rocks, you know, or adjust the size, that's where scale comes into play. So you can see I've got bigger stones, bigger gravel or sand or marble, different types of patterns that I can work from. So obviously the larger stones aren't going to be great for up here, but it's giving you a visual idea of what I'm trying to accomplish. So what I could do at this point would be to bring in that brick texture that I had downloaded and set it as a texture that I could reuse, just like these rock textures. So I'm gonna open up and go to my seamless brick texture that I downloaded, and it's going to open in its own document. That's what we want. I'm not file and placing it in here, but I'm going to alter this guy. And I'm going to hit Command or Control A. This is going to let me select the whole document. Then at that point, I can go to Edit. And just like when you create a brush from scratch, you can define a pattern from scratch also. So define pattern. It will give you an icon that it's supposed to look like, and it lets you name it. So I'll say, I'll call it just brick. I'll hit OK. Nothing happens, but, and I'll come back over here. You can see that it's now present. So I could apply that here. Now, this would be great if I had a small section of brick walkway that I wanted to use, and I'll alter my scale so it's not quite as crazy. That's pretty reasonable looking. And those bricks are the right size for maybe over here, but up close, not so much, not really working out great there. So another option, and I'll hide this, would be to file place your brick texture in. Here we go. Bring it down a little bit. Before I hit return, or you can hit return too, either way, but this is where transform, perspective, and warp can come into play. Because perspective, I can grab the corner, and you see how it's starting to mimic how perspective actually functions. It's almost treating it like it's a piece of paper, and I'm tilting the paper or pushing it out in front of me so that it looks like it's receding in space. I'll hit return and transform again. I don't want to transform the whole time because that's similar but not the same as going to edit perspective, which lets you alter how it seems to go forward in space. So you can see how I'm starting to get sort of a visual of the way that it should probably look as it moves in space. Yes, you are stretching pixels to a certain point, but you aren't stretching it. You can realize I'm trying to minimize the amount of stretch by shrinking it back down. And in this case, it's going to distort a little bit anyway because it's going back in space. Pixelation is going to be minimal in relation to everything else that we're going to look at. So just to sort of line it up as I can try to line it up, let's see. I'm just trying to line it up, maybe transform and tilt it a little bit so that it's sort of moving in the direction of the path that I started to build here. And if I wanted to duplicate my layer, and again, shrink, I can try and sort of line the parts up a little bit as best that I can, because the idea is you want it to kind of line up the way that you'd expect it to. You can see now, based on this brick texture and these brick textures, it's starting to recede in a much more realistic, kind of visually appealing way. So these are separate parts combined with this. I could also, I'll have my shape that I've made selected, but I can go in, and there's a path that's in there still. So I could load that path and mask both of these guys into it, and now it's even more convincing. And because it's separate, because these are separate layers, I can actually unlink the mask from the image so that if I need to rotate or adjust the positioning of certain parts of it, I still have the ability to do that. Whereas if they remain linked, if those remain linked, it's going to attempt to move the mask. I don't know why it's up here, but it's going to attempt to move the mask and the picture together as one unit. So by delinking them, it means I can rotate parts separate from one another. Do the same thing here. Just to adjust them, I want to try and have it flow as nice as I can. You know, if I wanted to continue making it smaller and smaller and smaller, that's also an option. Another option, I'll hide these guys and bring in that brick again. Then go up to Image, Transform, Perspective, and I'm gonna go pretty drastic just to get the visual that I'm looking for. And you can tilt this one way or another also. You can warp, which puts that sort of grid on it. So you can actually curve it, but you can see it's, if I curve too much, you can see that the pattern starts to fold on itself. So you got to be careful about that. Because that's, now it's looking like a piece of paper that's being folded into like a taco shape, half and half. That's not, ooh, you get some weird stuff going on if you're not careful. So it's important to be aware of how you're making changes. But you can see that that's actually curving the appearance of some of those pixels. All right, now that's stretching pixels a little too much. You want to be really careful about that, but you are getting the move, like the curvature that I would imagine would be associated with a path kind of going off in space. Another option, and I know there's lots of options here, is the good old Liquify. Now Liquify, I would have to rasterize this. So I would have to rasterize that layer. Click Liquify. And this is going to be where you have the option to push. But again, you want to be really careful because it's really easy to get some weird stuff. So you would want to be very cautious. Let's see, I want to see, there we go. Advanced gives me more options. So by making small adjustments first, or starting big and working your way small, that can be a really good option. So you can see I'm narrowing parts of that. I might decide that I need to mask an area in order to maybe curve the top portion. We'll see what the twirl has in store for us. Not really. I mean, it's kind of getting a neat direction, but that's probably not quite the direction that I'd like it to go in. So that's a little too much twirl. I'll move back to the forward warp and see if I can kind of warp it, maybe, or go to a smaller brush. So again, it kind of depends on your personal preference as well as what your particular landscape has as an option. Obviously, if you've got a very shallow, not a very deep image, you may not need to worry so much about this, and the good old copy and paste method off of a good photo that maybe you can find online might be a perfectly valid option, and that's okay too. That's not an issue. You know, this is a nice one. But again, all comes down to what your needs are and what the image's needs are. Okay. Yeah, that probably didn't work out quite as well as it could have. But even then, a combination of these methods might be appropriate. Now, things I'll be looking for, you can see that the edge of this is a little bit crisp, and because some of it was done using a shape, I might need to do some, you know, touching up over it using maybe some of the, maybe clone stamp, maybe smooth my mask a little bit, and feather that a little bit just to get it visually to do what you'd like it to do, to sort of blend in. But you don't want, especially with an image like this where you can start to see the pixelation, you don't want to have sharp edges like that. You want to try and smooth everybody out to blend in as cleanly as you can. And of course, lighting is important. If this path, or I'll say series of paths, was over here in the shadow, I would probably want to take into consideration that the shadow of the palm tree would need to cast a shadow onto the brick pathway as well. So in that instance, I might need to do some sort of combination method, or potentially just remember that I could always go in and grab my my burn and dodge tools in order to show where that is supposed to happen. So let's see. This guy. Duplicate so I keep my path. Rasterize. I'd probably want to set it to shadows so it gives a darker, or painting over it, that's an option too. Those are a little too red. So another option might be to grab my paintbrush, set it to black, set that to multiply, and lower the opacity to maybe 30%. And that would let you sort of paint in whatever that shadow happens to be too, and still convey the idea. Obviously do a better job than I am right now, but it would let you convey the idea that that shadow's still there. You haven't ignored it. You recognize that it's present. It's just, you know, you have to figure it out. And again, everyone is going to achieve the end result in a different way. Every single person in class could seek out a different way to develop this, or you might not include the pathway at all, but it is there as an option. And if it's an important aspect to your design, I do recommend including it. So that's all I have for right now. As last week, please check in with me, especially if you're having any problems or aren't entirely sure how, you know, what direction to take your assignment in. I'm always here if you need feedback prior to submission. And in the event that in my physical class any other questions do pop up that I think that you all can benefit from, I will not hesitate to make another video. So good luck, and I will chat with you soon.